Evolutionary Underground, episode 23. And this one, we're going to do super lean, super big with Geneza Pharma, one of our more favorite brands. So, we're going to discuss. It's going to be a fun podcast. So, let's start off with why Geneza Pharmaceuticals is such a great brand. And right off the
Yeah,
bat, quality. If you're trying to get super lean, you're trying to get super big on the cycle, what do you need? You need good quality steroids. Those are going to give you the edge. You're trying to break your plateau. You're trying to lean out and get big. You're trying to run a cycle where you're flexible and you can lean to the beginning of the cycle, get big later in the cycle, or vice versa. You need to rely on the steroids you're taking. If you're taking Anavar, you need to know it's Anavar. If you're taking Primo, you need to know it's Primo. If you're taking testosterone, you got to know it's properly dosed. All right. Nothing worse than running a cycle and running testosterone and then finding out 5 weeks later, oh my God, this stuff is underdosed. I'm not even getting any benefits from it because I'm getting the same amount of gear that I would get naturally or if it was on TRT. So definitely you want good quality gear. You want good quality support from the source you're using. You want to make sure that if you've got any problems with delivery, I mean, the post office can lose your package. Your package can get seized by customs. A package can get stolen. Lots of things can happen to your package, okay? You want to make sure that the source has your back in case something happens and the package doesn't get delivered, in case something happens where the person who's supposed to ship your product screws up and they ship it to the wrong place, in case anything can happen in between. So Geneza Pharma, they got a really good team. They make sure that they're on top of things when it comes to shipping. They ship it discreetly. I've had steroids before that have arrived with broken vials. It happens. You call up the source can either tell you, oh, go pound sand, we're not going to replace that. Or you can have a source, you show them the picture, you're like, look at this. I mean, the post office smashed this. Can you please, send me a replacement? And they're like happy to send you a replacement. They're on top of things. So different sources have different methods, but at the end of the day, we're, believe it or not, 99% of us out there, we're honest. We're not going to lie to a source. We're not going to tell a source, oh, these vials cracked in shipment just to get some free vials. We're not going to do that. So it's up to the source to make sure that they are taking care of us and making sure that we're happy, because that's what we want to do. We want to focus on the gym. We want to focus on our diet. We want to focus on our workouts. We want to focus on having fun during our cycle. We don't want to be stressed out, not sure, is this gear what I'm supposed to take? Is my package going to get here? And checking my mailbox every day and it's not here yet. You want a source that's going to give you a tracking number. You want a source that's going to be very, very transparent with you. And that's what Geneza Pharma is all about. And they've got so many products on their website. We're going to talk about some of their best steroids that we love and some of the cycles that we love to get ourselves super lean, super big. So Mobster touched on Geneza Pharma a little bit and get into what it means to you to get super lean, super big. We hear that term out there.
right. So, guys, and we touched on this on previous podcasts. We always recommend approved sources, and Geneza Pharma is an approved source. And DYOR, do your own research. Don't just take it on faith that Steve and Mobster are telling you 100% exactly how it is. Go off and do your own research and prove to yourself that we're telling you what we know to be gospel. So, what do? You can go and check the Geneza specific site, the GenezaDirect.org site for yourself. You can look at one of the agents and reps, companies that sell their products. You can see the quality of the product for yourself. You can see how the labels are, the holograms. You do all that kind of thing. You can look into the background. You can go off-site on other forums and come back and check. And you say, right, what makes an approved source so useful? Why do we recommend certain products? And that's because we know people that have tried them. We have this. We've done business with the source, either ourselves or members of the forums. We know who sells their product for them, as well as them selling the product to you directly. And that's how we back up our own research. That's how we value a company like Geneza Pharma. So, for example, you say, like, is the product tested? What's the manufacturing facilities like? And often as not, some companies, they won't show you anything. There's no photographs. There's no information. And so you go, okay, they're an underground lab. Should I trust them? Probably not. Probably not. The more information, the better. And there's a lot of information out there to show you that Geneza Pharma is a trusted source, that they sell a great, great product. Now, what about what Steve says? What does big and lean mean? Well, typically, the average Joe in the gym, and this is because Steve and I are going to come at this from two different angles. It's difficult to sometimes bulk up, i.e., to get big and be lean at the same time. It is possible, and that's called recomposition. My slant for Steve is going to be bulk first, cut second, and maybe that's old school. And that's how we're doing it. But big and lean, really, to me, Steve, is literally. I mean, here's the thing that's really, really weird, Steve, because I can bulk up like a motherfucker. I'm probably doing that all the time already, because I train for strength. I'm not training as a bodybuilder. But as often as not, people look bigger when they get leaner. So it's kind of, I think, when you see it, what a big bodybuilder looks like, whether he's 5 foot tall or 7 foot tall. It's those proportions, Steve. It's the big muscles, the huge arm, the bicep and the tricep around the elbow joint, massive forearms around the wrist joint. And it's just that kind of almost filled out in a weird, slightly disproportionate compared to the normal kind of person look. But when for us bodybuilders and for the iron game, we're looking for separation in the muscles. So not just big muscles around small joints, but separation in the muscles. And then when you get really lean, when you get crazy lean, we start to see veins. We start to see lines in the muscle. Now, is that what the rest of you want? Are you competing? Do you need to look that crazy? Probably not. So for me, Steve, it's going to be those flared lats, that broad shoulder, the muscles swelling around the joints, and a small waist. Now, when we start to get ripped, what do we see? We see those rows of abs start to come in. So that's that thing. Some of you guys don't want to get big, and some of you don't want to be ripped. Some of you are strength athletes like me, but a good percentage of our listeners, the reason why we're doing this podcast today, that's exactly what they're looking for, Steve. They want to look kind of freaky, but they also want to look kind of ripped at the same time. So that's big and lean for me. What do you think big and lean things means to you?
So here's what I think it means. Let's say you go to the beach, right? There's a lot of people in good shape. You're going to Southern California, maybe South Florida, parts of the country where people have a lot of age, like Miami, okay? Miami, you go to Miami Beach, there's a lot of hot people, man. You got supermodels that live there, like a large amount of supermodels live in Miami Beach, okay? And that's where their home is. They come from South America. They're Brazilian or they're from South America. And that's where they hang out. That's their hangout. Miami. It's right in between, it's kind of in between South America and New York. So if they got work in New York, they can just hop on a plane and get to New York. If they got work in California, they can hop on a plane and get in California. And then they have a house in South America as well. Maybe Brazil, maybe some of those other countries down there, Argentina or Colombia even. So that to me, that's the image you want to see. So if you go to those places, I'm not talking about going to another beach, maybe in the Carolinas or something, or in Georgia. People are probably all going to be like obese, right? That's the I call it the heart attack belt of America. It's like the deep South. It's the food, the deep fried foods and all this stuff. People don't really care about their bodies. It's a huge issue. That part of the country, people live the least amount of time, all that stuff. So you got to go to the bar or Southern California or something. You go to the beach, you see a lot of people in good shape. Now you can separate the people in good shape. And you could say, you know what, there's some guys, they're very lean. They got the 6-pack going, but they don't have much muscle on their frame. It's just a skinny surfer look. Okay. And obviously you don't see surfers with big muscle. All right. Because it would not be advantageous to you to be a surfer with big muscles. It would not be advantageous to you to be a swimmer who's got a lot of muscle mass. You ever see swimmers like during the Olympics? They're very, very skinny, very, very skinny, but they're strong as fuck. But they're just very, very lean look. But they got like rock hard muscles and they're ripped because that's going to help them swim. And they got very, very little body fat. So to me, it means every 10 people who are in shape, you might see one guy who looks like this, where they look lean, but they also look big.
Yeah.
All right. And that look is very, very not only hard to achieve, but it's also not very, you know, very common out there. And but it's very, very hard to get. So you got to respect people. Like you got to be on the juice to achieve that look. All right.
You'll know it when you see it. I think the thing
Yeah.
is, Steve, it's difficult for us to do one simple description. And I'll say for why, because every single one of our listeners will have an idea in their head of what it means. And I mean, it'd be like 100 people, it'd be 100 variations on a theme. But it's kind of weird, Steve. And I use the analogy of when you take someone who's not a bodybuilding fan to a bodybuilding competition, 9 times out of 10, they'll pick the winner. You know the look when you see it. It's not just padded out with a big jacket on and your legs are filling up the jeans or whatever the hell you're wearing. It is a look you will know. You will know what a bodybuilder looks like. You'll know when a person trains, and you'll know when that person who trains, who's big, who's bulky, is ripped. You will know the look when you see it. Now, what about how we're going to make that happen, Steve? I'll let you start.
So, there's different steroids. So let me start off with the number one steroid, okay, that these guys are on. And, I'll give you an example. I saw one of these guys. It was like a restaurant along the beach, and he's sitting there, and he's having a big meal, and, and he's sitting there laughing it up with a bunch of people. And he had like no shirt on. He's sitting up there at one of those outdoor restaurants on the beach. His muscles are huge. He's got tats on him, but he's lean. So I was with my friend at the time, and she made the comment to me. She pointed to him. She's like, what kind of steroids is that guy on? So this is basically the look, that he wants to achieve. He wants people walking down the street near the beach and pointing to him and say, what kind of steroids are you on? That gives his ego a stroke. You know what I'm saying? So as long as you can stroke that ego, that's the point of having that look. And he knows that no one's going to fuck with him. All right. If you're going to go fuck with that guy, you better bring a gun or a knife, because nobody's going to fuck with that guy fist to fist. Even if he can't fight for shit, nobody's going to fuck with that guy. So that's that look that a lot of guys want to achieve to get respect. You get that kind of respect out there. Like if you go up to that guy, you're going to be respectful. You're not going to go up to him and like start shit with him. So that's the look a lot of you want to achieve out there. And I get it, because I've been that short, skinny kid my whole life too. So sometimes we get sick of it, right? And we want to just fucking look a certain way. And that's the look. So the number one steroid for this, it's got to be Tren. In Trenbolone, there are a lot of good options on Geneza Pharma with Trenbolone. You got GP Tren acetate. You got GP Tren enanthate. Now, the acetate comes in 100 milligram a milliliter, and the enanthate comes in 200 milligram milliliter. They also have the Tren Hex, and they have Tri-Tren, which is a blend of all 3 trends. So they get you covered from head to toe when it comes to this. So it boils down, I'll keep it simple for you. If you want to run a shorter cycle, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, go with the Tren Ace. If you're looking to run a longer cycle, you can go, if you want to go 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, or maybe 11 or 12 weeks, if you've got the balls to do that with Tren, then go with the enanthate. And if you want something in between, you can always go with the Hex. And if you're not sure either, and you just want to go ahead and inject 3 times a week, you're good, then you can go with the Tri-Tren. So there's many different options. But Trenbolone is the nectar of the gods. And Trenbolone can not only lean you up, but it can make you big. All right. So even if you don't change a thing with your diet, you don't change a thing with your training, you don't change a thing with your sleep schedule, everything stays the same. You just go on Tren, it can be like night and day. So Tren is an amazing steroid for this purpose, to get lean and get big. And a lot of guys, even on a shitty diet, and I'm never telling you to do that, but even on a shitty diet, a lot of guys they'll lean up on Tren and get big, even if they're eating shit food. But eventually that's going to catch up to you. So you always want to eat healthy on or off cycle. But Tren is such an incredible steroid, and it's so effective no matter what you do it. Now, you can run it by itself, or you can run it with pretty much anything out there. Now, the side effects do matter here. So I don't recommend running Tren with anything else harsh if you want to limit the crazy side effects you get on Tren. But if you don't care about the side effects and you just want to fucking go balls to the wall, then you can use more harsh things with Tren. Now, what do I mean by harsh things? Anadrol, Dianabol and Dianabol aromatizes like crazy into estrogen. It's going to complicate the cycle. Large amount, moderate or large amounts of testosterone with it, complicating things, androgenic, estrogenic effects, halo, superdrol, very, very harsh orals.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to injectables, you know, if you're taking you know, a large amount of any anabolic steroid, equipoise, even like if you're taking that, even though it's a mild steroid, if you take 1,000 milligrams of equipoise or tren, you're going to multiply your side effects, you're going to multiply your blood pressure issues, your cholesterol issues. So whatever you stack with tren, you may want to go the mild route. Go with 300 milligrams of EQ versus 1,000 milligrams of EQ, for example, or Primobolan. You could stack Primobolan with tren. You could stack a low dose of testosterone, 100, no more than 125 or 150 milligrams of testosterone. Masteron, you could stack Masteron with tren. It goes really, really good with this with tren always, because it can harden you up. And you know, when it comes to orals, Anavar, Turinabol, both mild. I would run with Masteron, maybe 300, 400, 500 milligrams at the most. With Anavar, I'd run maybe 30, 40 milligrams, maybe 50 at the most. Same thing with Turinabol. You could start out with 20, maybe go 30, 40 milligrams with the Turinabol. And then those stack good with the tren. And then when it comes to tren, you know, if you're gonna run it by itself, you could stack it up to 400 milligrams. Some guys go higher, but 350, 400 has always been plenty for me, plenty. And then some guys go as low as 200 or 250 a week, you know, and then you could start stacking with something else mild. You can get really, really good effects. So if you haven't had tren, tried tren before, and you want to get this effect of getting super lean and super big on the same cycle and having that monster look where you're sitting on the beach and nobody wants to fuck with you and you get ultimate respect, then tren is definitely numero uno, and it's one to look at for sure. The downside to tren is the side effects, as I said. We're talking, a lot of people want to know, Steve, what side effects does, you know, am I at risk with tren? Because I think I could take tren and I get side effects. I said, okay, try it. But this is what you're going to be dealing with. You're going to feel like hot and dehydrated all day. Fatigue, low energy fatigue, carb cravings, trensomnia, night sweats, day sweats. Like you're breaking down the sweats. And then when you start sweating on tren, you'll wake up nauseous. Like if you sweat on tren at night, you get night sweats, you'll wake up nauseous and dehydrated. And then you got to like hydrate in the morning as much as you can. And it just doesn't feel like you're able to hydrate on tren. It's like a nonstop, nasty feeling. And there's all kinds of other side effects. Obviously, the trauma that it puts your organs through, your liver, your kidneys, your heart, your cholesterol, your blood pressure, just a lot of side effects. So be smart with tren. Don't use it if you're new to this. Get at least 4 or 5 cycles under your belt before you try tren. It is a different animal. So, Mobster,
jump in for a second. So, dose dependent, guys. If you've never used it before, I wouldn't recommend going much over 300 milligrams. And as a recent podcast we just recorded, best not to start too far out of shape, especially if we're doing a super big, super lean cycle and training protocol. And that would be especially true if you're going with Stevesmi choice of using tren. Don't be a fat motherfucker and have that do the work. And especially, again, with one of Steve's other recommendations, don't get too out of shape and then throw Masteron into the mix, because a Masteron, which is a great hardener, and it would be especially useful in this kind of cycle, is only going to harden up what the muscle that you're feeding under that layer of fat. So the trick here is to, I would say, Steve, try up 12, 13% body fat and come down from there. Now, I would take, as we discussed in the pre-show, a different approach. One of my favorites, and I've mentioned this before, guys, so I'm not changing my mind, my favorite bulk up and then a cutter. So what I'm talking about here, 6 to 8 weeks, I prefer the shorter periods of time as a bulk up, the old school, and 6 to 8 weeks of cutting down. Now, Steve talks about the beach. Make sure you give yourself those 12 to 16 weeks to get ready for the beach. So what would the bulk portion, and I'll come back to the cutting portion in a minute. GP Deca 300 and GP Sustanon 270. I've told you guys before, it was one of my all-time favorite bulking steroid cycles. What happened with me back in the day? I'm thinking mid 2000s, Steve's 280 pounds at 6'3" to 300 pounds on Sustan Deca, and probably around these kind of dosages, Steve. I think I was doing a little bit less than 700 milligrams of it. 675 seems to ring a bell. And that would be, I think I was taking every 3 to 4 days a jab. And I blew up like a motherfucker. So for me, the bulk portion, that was the way that I go. If I had a choice of injectable, which I've just described, or a oral, the oral, dead simple, really easy, Stevie, 50 milligrams a day of Diana-Blow. I know, even now, I think I would add 8 to 10 pounds of mass to my frame right now, doing 50 milligrams a day of GP Diana-Blow 50. Straight up, no problems, no mucking around. So that's my bulk approach. I would also, and I'm going to include this now, Steve, as well, I would change my training. So right now I train this kind of weight already. If I'm talking about the average listener here, I would have them do big, heavy compounds for 6 to 8 weeks. Strip out the bullshit, strip out the shaping exercises, throw them away for a minute. We're going to bring those back in when we cut. We're going to bring back in the detail stuff later on. But we're talking about getting big first. And I mean, super big, as per the topic title, super big. So what do I want from you guys? Obviously, heavy squats, heavy benching, heavy chins. I want you to do deadlifts. I want you to do dips. I want you to do the big, heavy compound exercises. You're not going to be doing much of tricep kickbacks here. You're not going to be working on the inner and outer head of a different muscle. You're not going to be looking for your heavy pressing. Laterals are going to be coming back in 6 to 8 weeks' time. So it is that combination of, for me, a very successful bulking portion to the training, and then the training itself combined with the anabolics here and using Geneza products to bulk up, Steve. Now, again, average listener isn't 6'3". So what do I think would happen? Guys, if you eat right and if you train right, like I'm talking about, I think most of you could add 10 pounds of muscle in 6 weeks, doing it right. And then what we're going to be looking at in the second part for me is the cutting portion. I'll go back to Steve now. What would you have the guys training on briefly while they're in that, they're on trend? Would you moderate the training? Would you moderate the cardio? For example, we know cardio is horrendous when you're on trend. So how would you have
Well,
them?
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because trend forces you to change your cardio because you're not going to be able to do much cardio on trend. Trend absolutely destroys your cardio. So that's another good point, Mobster. Make sure you go into any trend cycle with very, very good wind. And what I mean by that is get yourself in the best shape possible when it comes to cardio before you start your trend. So you might want to start testing yourself out. Go run a mile. See how fast you can run a mile. If you struggle to run a mile like under 10 minutes, then let's be honest, you're just not in good shape, And when you get on trend, you're going to get absolutely demolished. So you want to get into top shape before you start the trend. That will actually limit the side effects you have while you're on trend. And when it comes to cardio on trend, I would do like short, high intensity, in and out. You don't want to do, you can't do long distance cardio on trend. Like I can't imagine like trying to run like a 5K or a 10K on trend. You would absolutely be demolished across the board. So you do more harm than good doing that. So keep your cardio like 10, 15 minutes on trend. Try maybe, some hill running when you're on trend, up and down the hill a few times, and that's your cardio. But yeah, trend isn't the one if you want cardio. Now you can run EQ with it, and EQ will kind of help that cardio. So that is a little tip. So I'm glad you bring that up, Mobster, when it comes to cardio on trend. But no, but trend isn't the time to do cardio. You better be doing the cardio when you're off trend before. Don't wait till you use trend.
Something else, Steve. And funny enough, on the subject of cardio, there's a great argument to be made, especially if you're just getting super big. And what do I mean by that? Just bulking. Not to do much cardio. But the reality of the situation is, I'd actually get you to do cardio regardless. Now, whether, like Steve says, it's making sure you don't lose your aerobic capacity on trend. But for me, the other aspect would be your appetite. I want to stimulate your appetite, especially for these super big portion. I want you to eat. I want you to be hungry. So the cardio here is not to strip the body fat off you. That comes in the second portion for me. But it's to keep your appetite, your metabolism ticking over. So it's one of those things, even, and Steve knows this because we've covered this before, the size that I am, I make sure that I go out and get my steps daily. And that's as much from my aerobic capacity as me blowing up and getting super fat, sitting on my ass, not doing any aerobics, not getting in my daily steps. So it's one of those things I think's changed probably from back in the day, Steve, in that, you know, you'd be told to I think there's an analogy here, which was if you wanted to gain weight, it would be walk, don't run, sit, don't walk, lie down, don't sit up. It was that trying to slow you guys down. But in reality, for most of you, and especially in modern society, we want you to do aerobic to keep fit, to keep your heart and your lung health on point. But here specifically, because I actually think if you, even if you're eating less clean, like you would on a bulk, like you would on a super big portion using Geneza products, I would still want you to include the cardio to stimulate the appetite, to keep your metabolism. Basically, I want you hungry and to feed up with those compounds, with the products that we're recommending to get as big as possible. I mean, you could even throw some SARMs in here, Steve, and a couple of appetite stimulants. That's what, especially for those of you that come from the more underweight side of it. But again, the great and vast majority of our listeners, I think, in modern society, that's not really going to be a problem. It's probably about 5 to 10% of our listeners that are underweight and struggle with their appetite. So again, perversely, doing cardio actually is useful in here, not just for the obvious reasons. Now, I'll approach the second thing for me, like I said. So if I'm saying 6 weeks, 8 weeks, bulking up, getting super big, what about getting you guys super lean? Right, so here's my product list. GP Stanozol 50, Winstrol, basically, guys, plus GP Test E200/EQ200. Now, they make this as a mix for you. And the alternate oral here would be oral GP Turinabol 25. Now, both these, and with the possible, I mean, I'm actually going to say with Winstrol, we know there's a potential for side effects if you're already crazy lean, if you already started at 12% and under body fat. I'd actually go as far as 10% here, Steve, for the dry joints. And when you start the diet down, when you start to lose body fat, you're getting that little cushion of body fat, the little bit of intracellular fluid between the joints, and that dryness can feel kind of creaky. I think Steve's actually described it thus, along the lines of it feels like your joints are creaking when you're opening your elbow, when you're moving your knee hinges, and so on and so forth. So you have to get real lean. You can throw in a little bit of fish oil to help you there. But at the same time, its reputation for drying people out, especially in combination with a diet, is on point. Now, the argument for a great many people with the test and EQ mixed together here, test is so many people talking about having a test base. I don't think a test base is needed in every situation, but here we're using test and EQ together, pre-made for you, ready to rock and roll. And look at the numbers again here, Steve. You're not looking at massive amounts of high dosages. I'd probably go double on these two. So you're only looking at 100 milligrams of Winstrol a week, and only with the other two things together, 800. So you're only looking at 900 milligrams total. Now, for a lot of the guys, the modern guys, those people that go away with it more is better. I don't think so. Here, as a cutting cycle, 900 milligrams a week is fantastic. It's under a gram. And I'm very much of that. If you can't grow in a gram, then there's no point doubling up or tripling up. Here we're looking to get into shape anyway, and you've already done the growing. Again, what do I do about training? I mentioned earlier on using the compounds to get super big. I want to get super lean. But what we're also talking about here is not necessarily super lean, Steve. It's lowering your body fat, but it's looking that shape, looking that freaky, looking in what we know and understand super big and super lean to be. So that means making certain muscles start to pop out, certain details start to come in. Now, you don't have to necessarily just up the reps, but if you have the potential, it would be stuff like what we call shaping exercises. So that specific outer head, the lateral head of the delt with side laterals and similar exercises, upright rows and like that. it would be practicing vacuums. Guys, you don't have to be a competing bodybuilder to practice the vacuums. And why should you practice the vacuums? Because it brings your waist down. It teaches you waist control. So now you look like you have a slim waist. It would be easing off the heavy squats and the heavy deadlifts. Not just necessarily because I want you guys to get weaker. I don't. I just want that little bit lack of thickening of the waist to happen. But the diet is super, super important. Now, in the first part, we talked about using cardio as a means of stimulating metabolism and your appetite. Here, we're looking to reduce your body fat levels. It's as simple as that. The Geneza products, as they don't do the work in and of themselves, guys. If you're a fat motherfucker and you take what is a cutting cycle, it's still fat. You need to get rid of that body fat. You need to make stuff start to pop. And like I said earlier, it's about making those muscles, especially around your joints. So, for example, accentuating the outer quad, working on your calves. What happens there is your knee stays the same size, but your muscles start to flare out from the knee, from the ankle, from the elbow, from the shoulder. For example, guys, would I have you doing a neck thickening exercise? No, quite the opposite. I'd actually have you do less overhead pressing, less behind the neck pressing, and maybe more lateral and upright rows, and then at pre-exhausting of those, and then bringing in pressing, because I don't want your neck thickening up. I want your traps to pop. I want your delts to pop. I want the tricep out ahead of your tricep to come out, and so on. But the cardio here is super, super important. You must, and I'm going to reiterate this at the end of this podcast, Steve, you must be on point with your diet. These are not necessarily great and dramatic changes here. It's only 6 to 8 weeks of both. That's 12 to 16 weeks overall. But we would probably change your ratios here, guys. Steve, talk about how you tweak the diet before we talk about my alternate of Tyrannomol.
Yeah, so with diet, it's really good to eat in a time restricted window, in almost all situations. Now, when you're using Tren, certain steroids like Tren, they're like sponges in your muscle. They boost insulin resistance and all that stuff. So it's really important to be insulin sensitive before you get on Tren, because it's going to turn you more insulin resistant. So on Tren, you definitely want to eat differently. If you're doing time restricted eating, you don't want to do fasting on Tren. You want to basically stay as hydrated as you can. You're bringing in a lot of fluids. You're pushing out a lot of fluids. Very, very important to urinate as well, because when you urinate, all the waste comes out. All right. So you got to bring a lot of water in, and you got to flush a lot of water out through urination. Very, very important. I'm trying to keep that cycle going. So yes, you will be peeing more than usual on Tren, and that's a good thing. You want to be doing that. You also on Tren want to be spreading out your carbs, good quality carbs. Now, everyone thinks carbs means cake and ice cream and cookies and all this stuff. No, talking about your good quality carbs, your sweet potatoes, those are your bread and butter. Learn to cook sweet potatoes. Maybe get an air fryer. Maybe get a sweet potato cooker. Rice, get a rice cooker. Rice cookers, you just put the rice in, you add water, add some salt, add some coconut oil, and boom, you set it for about 60, 70 minutes, and then the rice is done. And you can package up the rice and keep it in a container. So these are really good carb options. Fruit is your friend. You want to make sure you're eating a lot of fruit when you're running these harsher steroids like Tren. Now, other steroids that we're going to talk about here, you don't have to go that route. It just depends on the steroid. The more harsh the steroid, the more you want to kind of tweak your diet a little bit. So why don't you get into the next cycle, Mobster?
Yeah, let me just jump back in for a second on the diet here, guys. Meal prep. And for both portions of my training here, Steve, in terms of, like I said, with the ratios, whether I be, as you said, Steve, more quality carbs, especially in my super big portion, as well as keeping a proper good idea on the protein, tweaking the diet as you go along, guys. So here's the thing, and I've touched on this before, tweaking the diet to accommodate the gains. This is what happens with a lot of new guys when they're coming into the game, and they say, what do I weigh? What do I eat right now? Well, what you eat right now is the reason for the size you are right now. You need to eat for the size you want to be. So if you want to get super big, you want to gain 10 pounds before we get super lean, then eat for being 10 pounds heavier than what you are. You can do that gradually. You can do 2 weeks of this amount, 2 weeks of this amount, and 2 weeks at the top amount where you've gained the 10 pounds. It's no good being 1,000 or 2,000 calories over your normal amount right at the beginning, because you'll add fat, and we want you to add some fat, but a lot of lean tissue. Equally, eat for the size that you're going to be when you've got nothing but lean muscle. All that body fat's disappeared. So tweak as you go along. It's the reason why we recommend you run a log on the forum, so we can help you tweak that diet and get for the size. Do a consult with Steve. Look at the changes that you need to make for the size that you want to be. If you want to get super big, you eat this way, and you tweak it as you go along. If it was a pure super big 12-week cycle, I would have you probably do that in the 3 stages to allow you to gain a 1 pound or 2 pound a week for the full 12 weeks. Equally, same when you're getting super lean. But here we're splitting it up. Now, for my alternate here, Steve's fairly straightforward. It's specifically developed for this particular reason, and that's Turinabol as an oral. All my alternates today are orals. So GP Turinabol 25. Why? It was specifically developed to not have Russian and East German, specifically athletes, bulk up too much. It was a way of increasing their athletic ability, which is kind of like throwing a discus, putting a shot, and so on and so forth. So a power to weight ratio went up, but at the same time, they didn't bulk up. Now, of course, those were athletes in the Olympic Games. We're using it as bodybuilders, and we're using it here to maintain the muscle tissue that we've built up in the bulking portion that I'm suggesting. Keep that muscle tissue, not have it disappear as you cut. And that quite often, that's what happens a lot. We know this. You know, this is the reason why Steve calls bulkers perma-bulkers sometimes, because they hate the idea of getting smaller. They hate the idea of losing muscle. And in reality, they're covering all the muscle that they do have, any strength muscle that they have, with a layer of fat, and it never comes off because they like being big. So Turinabol is one of those great, I would say it's almost anti-catabolic than anabolic, Steve, in that it's holding onto that hard-earned muscle tissue that you guys have spent pre the cycle, but especially in the bulking portion of the cycle. It's keeping as much of that muscle tissue, and this is the reason why the athletes use it, and the strength, and at the same time, it's allowing you to do the cardio, to manipulate your diet, to tweak those ratios like I'm talking about, and lose body fat. And again, especially here, guys, if it's working for Olympic level athletes at probably far less than what we call performance enhancing levels, then it should work. And something else, Steve, as well. It's one of those, and we've touched this on in previous podcasts, regardless of the source, I think it's vastly underrated by a great many people. I think it's a lovely drug, especially in this situation, for the reasons I've stated, as a way of keeping muscle tissue, maintaining muscle tissue, not going on a cut, not going on a diet, not getting super lean and losing muscle, which is honestly, guys, it can be an absolute mind fuck. The amount of guys I've seen that they can proclaim on a log on the forum, they'll say something like, "I want to get as big as possible," and literally 4 to 6 weeks in, Steve, they lose the plot because they've got fat. So they get freaky and they say, "Oh, I'm thinking of changing my cycle." That happens a lot. Here, we're planning on it. We're not worried about losing our cuts because we've got big, and we're not shrinking down and losing all our muscle size and losing our bulk and freaking out about losing that size. We're not doing that at all. We're actually planning on it. And it's a psychological thing here, guys. So let's give you a couple of mobster tips. First off, when you're doing a super big, super lean cycle, you want to have it in mind, the end game. And that end game is exactly what Steve was talking about earlier on. That is that freaky, muscular, you know it when you see it look on the beach, whether that's a sitting and chilling, whether it's walking around, whether it's playing a little bit of football with your buddies, whatever, especially when you're trying to get the girls. This is the end game. Do not let the bulk thing freak you out. Do not let shrinking down freak you out. Do regular checks with the photographs so you can see those cuts are starting to come in. You know, the bulking, you can see yourself starting to fill out. Wear the same clothes every so often when you're doing this stuff. That shirt that you wore at the beginning is tighter on the bulk. That shirt that you wore when you was bulking is looser because you're cutting. Those are the kind of little tricks that remind you of what you're doing, that remind you that you're bulking up, that remind you that you're cutting down. Take a photograph of your abs at the beginning, take a photograph of your abs at the end. It's that kind of stuff that helps you maintain that. You're going to be using Geneza products. You're going to be doing Stevesmi and Mobster's tips for training, and you're going to have that end game in mind, a psychological aspect here. I mean, Steve, how many people lose the plot on cycle? And especially when the dieting, the kind of mind gets a bit crazy. Even top professional bodybuilders, this is the reason why they have coaches. They kind of lose the plot a little bit when they're tired, when they're hungry, and they need to have their eye on the end game. What do you think on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're trying to accomplish this, Rome wasn't built in a day. So, full disclosure, we're trying to give you the cycles that we think you can do it, but you've got to be a little patient because it may take 2 or 3 cycles for you to reach your goals, which is a good thing. It's good to have lofty goals because when you have lofty goals, that pushes you to keep going. So obviously it's not going to be one cycle where you're hitting this. Now, if you have a few cycles under your belt and then you run this cycle these cycles that we're recommending, it could definitely be that little difference in your plateau. So I'm going to get into my next cycle on that note. And this is one I think that a lot of guys will really, really like, especially if you run some conservative cycles, your first few cycles. And this is one for those of you who are in a smaller time frame, meaning you want the results in 5 or 6 weeks, within 5 or 6 weeks, because you want to look like this. Maybe you got a beach vacation coming up. Maybe you got a vacation in the Caribbean coming up. Maybe you just want to get bigger really, really quick. This isn't going to be one for those of you who have suspicious coworkers, suspicious family, whatever. They're going to call you out for using steroids, if that makes sense. Because people are going to think, wow, you must be on steroids after this stack. So Anadrol. Anadrol is the one. Of all the oral steroids, this is the one. If you told me, Steve, give me one oral steroid that you would run if you want to accomplish a lot in a short amount of time, say 5 weeks, 6 weeks, Anadrol is the one. 50 milligrams a day of Anadrol from Geneza Pharma. And their Anadrol is dirt cheap. So it's not going to cost you a lot of money either. So I think it's a great, great, great idea to try this Anavor cycle. It doesn't have to be long, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. Make sure you're running your liver support with it, of course. But this one, you'll get really, really good results. You'll get big and you'll get lean at the same time. Anadrol is a weird steroid. It is a DHT derivative, which means it doesn't aromatize into estrogen, but it does bind to estrogen receptors. So some guys who are really, really sensitive to estrogen side effects, you're going to want to steer clear of Anadrol because you can get yourself into trouble. So my advice is if you're a week or 2 into Anadrol and problems are coming on Anadrol, you might want to stop using it completely. But those of you who can tolerate the estrogenic binding with Anadrol, you're going to love it. And it's going to make you big. I've had friends that don't want to run injectables who run Anadrol, they do CrossFit or they're just gym rats. And I can tell, I'll see them like 4 weeks later. I'm like, wow, dude, you got big. You got lean and you got big. Very, very impressive. And that's what they took. They took Anadrol. So this might be a really good one for a lot of you who don't want to use an injectable and want to try something where it's only 4 or 5 weeks. So try Anadrol one day. If you see something, if you're in a situation like that and you just want to do an oral, you don't want to do an injectable, just try Anadrol and see what happens. It can really give you that good, super lean and super big effect. So Mobster, what's your next one?
I was going to throw in an alternate here, guys, and that's NPP. Geneza does a GB NPP 100. NPP is basically, as Steve already knows, is a derivative of one of the drugs that I've already recommended, but it's more of a blend, isn't it, Steve? So it's that ability to do with the DECA and ASUS that I've already mentioned. NPP is a alternate for those two already. And again, it's for the bulking portion, but I think it comes at a slightly different angle with different ratios, Steve. Sustanol, for example, we already know is a combination of esters anyway. DECA is just one steroid. NPP is a combination of esters of one steroid. So it's that kind of thing where if you're giving yourself alternates. This is also something that Steve touched on earlier on, which is the having especially when it comes to training, especially, but having a little bit of experience. Guys, let me give you another tip. I wouldn't want you to suddenly bulk up and or cut unless, and especially when you've got an end date hitting that beach in mind, being super big, super lean, and not knowing how the effects that these particular products are going to have on your body. So I want you to have some previous experience, and especially we want that kind of freaky look, guys. So I want you to know what you're doing and not have the end game, the end date be ruined because you're not ready, because it's going to take another 2 weeks for you to get in shape and the holiday's already arrived. That beach time's already arrived. So have some experience. But again, guys, those of you that know how DECA and SUS works for you, try NPP as an alternate. Use Geneza NPP purely and simply because you already got an idea of how something's going to work. And something else as well, which I've touched on in the past, we did a podcast recently where I said, if it works, stick with it. Well, you already know, because this is what we're talking about here, Steve. You already know that SUS and DECA works for you. You already know that you're going to bulk up. I know for sure. So for me to try a product like Geneza's NPP isn't too far away from what I've done before. It's just a slightly different ester version of what I've already done before. So I already know that I'm going to get a fairly good response using a SUS and DECA cycle. So using NPP as an alternate means I'm only going to get a slight difference. I'm not too far away from what I was doing before, but I'm allowing for the fact that I might respond differently. I might have been leaner when I did my previous cycle. I might have been fatter. I might be less lean or more fat now. I need to know these things in advance. Something else, Steve, and I want to touch on is the ancillaries. Now, I'm not a fan of this, and I know Steve isn't, but I want you guys to be in shape. So when we're talking about super lean, so what else can we throw in here, Steve? Geneza does Clen, a GP Clen 40 micrograms. This is definitely for the second proportion here, guys. This is for getting you into shape. It's for chiseling away those final details. Now, why am I not a fan? Now, this is for personal, guys. I know a lot of you will be, which is why I'm recommending it. But I'm not a fan because I know that a lot of people struggle with the side effects. So like the trend, side effects is always going to be an issue. And yet the results are, in this example, Steve, everything. Why do people like trend? Because of the effect that it has on their body, the way that they look. Why do people hate trend? Because they hate the side effects. It's just like that, Steve. So does Clen work? Yes. If you are doing the cardio and the diet, does GP produce a great Clen? Yes, they do. Will you like the side effects? Some of you will not like the side effects. We're keeping it straightforward here, guys. There's no bullshit on this podcast. So 40 micrograms. I'd actually have you starting on less, Steve, 20 micrograms, and working your way up to 40 micrograms. 20 might be enough. Guys, some of you listening are going to be more out of shape than the others. Some of you going into the second part of my cycles are going to be more out of shape than the others. So some of you will struggle with greater or lesser side effects depending on how fat or how lean you are. And this is the reason, again, that we want you to run logs online, put pictures up, get your body fat percentages measured. Don't get too out of shape when you're beginning this cycle, purely and simply because it's that much easier to control, that much easier to tweak. It's real simple to go from 10, 20, 30, 40 micrograms. If you go in at 40 and you have those horrendous side effects, you're probably going to stop. And that's going to mean you're going to have to do something else again, which is kind of skewed. Where if you go in low and you build up to it and you kind of, oh, that's okay, 20 is fine, 30 I don't like, 40 I don't like, then stay at 20. If you didn't get it too out of shape at the beginning. So it's these kind of tweaks, Steve. It's another reason why we have the logs. It's another reason why we have the consult. What kind of ancillaries would you like to have the users of these cycles, bulking, super big and super lean? What ancillaries would you have them run, Steve?
Yeah, so you definitely always want to keep an aromatase inhibitor on hand. So aromacin, arimidex, letro in the emergency situation. Those are very important. Obviously, for your post-cycle, Clomid, Nolvadex, those are bread and butter, selective estrogen receptor modulator SERMs. So those are what you want to keep. Some guys on cycle, they like to run ACG. That's also available. Geneza Pharma has all these products. Never run ACG in PCT if you want to recover properly. The ACG on cycle will help keep your balls plump, can help boost your libido a little bit, can help kind of balance, increase your estrogen a little bit, maybe give a little estrogen boost on cycle. But I'm not really a big fan of ACG personally, but some guys seem to like it for that reason. So those are the ancillaries you always want to keep on hand. And those are all sold by Geneza Pharma as well. So Geneza Pharma is a great on-cycle and post-cycle source brand. They have it all, and they got you taken care of across the board. So it's a one-stop shop for all of that. So you also want to run your support supplements, of course, as well. Now, my third and final cycle I want to get into testosterone and masteron. Now, this is for guys who want to keep things simple. And let me go over this one, and then Mobster, you can do another cycle if you got another cycle up your sleeve as well. Yeah, so testosterone, masteron. Why am I saying testosterone, masteron? Pretty simple. You can, if you're a good reactor to testosterone, you can get super lean, super big on just testosterone. But most people don't. Most people don't. On testosterone, most people use testosterone as a straight bulker. All right. But some of you react really good to it, especially if you got low testosterone levels to begin with. In that case, it's going to be really hard for you to put on muscle and lose fat if you got low testosterone. So testosterone would be great in that situation because it will allow you to use a good amount and boost your testosterone levels, get your hormones going. So I think that's a really good idea. And then masteron with it. Why am I saying masteron? It's a hardener. It's going to dry you out. It's going to cause you more vascularity. So it's going to make your muscles look rock solid. So if you're a good reactor to testosterone, masteron together would be beautiful. So in this case, you could do something like testosterone enanthate, testosterone cypionate with a long ester masteron enanthate if you wanted to go 12 weeks. Now, if you wanted to go short, you could do testosterone propionate, which is a shorter ester, and you can do masteron propionate, which is a shorter ester, and mix them in the same syringe and pin them. Dosing anywhere from 200 to 500 milligrams would be a suitable dose, and you want to keep an AI at hand in case you go with a higher dosage of testosterone. So try that as well for those of you who really like your testosterone. And if you've never used masteron before, you'll really like masteron. It is a little bit pricey, but Geneza Pharma, they keep their steroids affordable. So it used to be masteron was so damn expensive, guys couldn't get their hands on it. If you're going to run 500 milligrams for 12 weeks, very, very difficult, very expensive. But Geneza Pharma makes it affordable. You can get 12 weeks of masteron and run it at dosage, and it won't cost you an arm and a leg. So that's a really, really good stack too, Mobster. So, yeah. So, Mobster, why don't you
jump in with my last option here, Steve. So, something I touched on earlier on, and I want to come at this at a slightly different angle. So I said, right, we know that the great and vast majority of people walking around these days, I'm especially thinking of Europe, the UK, and America, obesity is an issue. So the question then becomes, guys, is do you really need to get bulky? Do you really need to bulk up? So here's the thing, guys. If you are a person that trains, you shouldn't be too out of shape. So the average Joe on the street, I'd make a different recommendation. But it's worth thinking about. Most people in our day and age are a little bit, in the Western world, a little bit out of shape, a little bit overweight. They're carrying a little bit too much fat. But if you train, I'd want our listeners to not be those kind of people. So I'm going to hope when I make this suggestion that you're not too out of shape. Otherwise, I'd have a different answer for you. So now I personally, and I've mentioned this in previous podcasts, never really got on with testing enanthate. And yet I'm going to recommend a Geneza product, Test E200 and EQ200, both of those 200 milligrams of each of those in the vial. And I'm going to come at it with a slightly different angle here, Steve. So that's my kind of bulker, right? For most people, test, as Steve said already, would be a bulker. And I've talking about, let's keep this to 12 weeks instead of 12 to 16 weeks, like I touched on earlier on. I'm going to have you 8 weeks bulking on the 2 forms of tests. And then I'm going to have you hardening up with Anavar and oral for the last 4 weeks. Now, again, any recommendation that we make is assuming that you have some kind of shape to begin with. If we were doing one-to-one coaching, if we were doing one-to-one consulting, we would be looking at how you look. If we're online on the forums and we're seeing pictures to put up, we can make these we can move the time that you start to cut. We can keep you longer bulking if you're underweight. So that would change. What we're trying to do is a sort of generalized piece of advice. So here, for example, you're not that out of shape to begin with, and you're taking the test E200 and it's EQ 200 as a way of bulking up, as a way of adding muscle tissue to get super big. And then I'm moving the portion of getting super lean to a shorter period of time. And I'm doing that for two reasons. One, because I didn't let you get out of shape to begin with. And two, because as most recommendations, I don't have a problem running orals for 8 weeks, but I know people that like to keep it 4 to 6 weeks, Steve, because orals having that particular harsher issues on your liver and the kidneys because of the first pass, bloody blah, blah. Guys, you already know that. But I want you to not stay on for crazy amounts of time. So, for example, I'm never going to recommend, even with GP Anavar 50, that you run it for 16 weeks. That to me is just crazy. That's just too much of a risk factor. But I would move that portion, Steve, from bulking to cutting, dependent on how out of shape you were at the beginning, how successful the bulking portions have been, how soon we need to get you to cut, how quick that beach day is coming up. And so for me, and for most people, and in fact, GP's Anavar 50 has got it done at that dose specifically for that reason. The recommendation from me would be 50 milligrams a day. What does Anavar do? Well, first off, you're going to be definitely doing more cardio, like we talked about earlier. You're definitely tweaking that diet. You are, as we already said, tweaking the training to bring out those show details, so to get those little show muscles to pop a little bit more, plus you're chiseling the fat off. And again, for me, for Anavar is a great strength drug, which means, again, I'm maintaining my level of strength, even if I'm doing this getting super big, getting super lean cycle. And that means I'm keeping and maintaining muscle tissue. Of course, a great many anabolics, Steve, were developed specifically for anti-catabolic reasons. Guys, that are patients in hospital, men and women that were injured with burns, some terrible cancers, certain medical conditions that meant they were laying in bed, they couldn't move around much, they could barely walk, etc., etc. So it kept the tissue on. And that's precisely what we're looking at here. We're eating better, we can move around, we can train, but we're maintaining that hard-earned, bulking, super big muscle and keeping as much of that as possible on our frames. Here's an example of the sort of stuff that happens even in top level bodybuilding. And especially probably in the 80s and 90s, Steve, the guys then were still bulking up, getting absolutely huge, doing the same kind of routines and exercises that I was talking about earlier, getting absolutely massive. And then they would do such a dramatic cut that they lost 5 or 10 pounds of muscle tissue, as well as 20 pounds of body fat. So they shrunk right down. They also had a really, really bad habit in those days of changing the training because they were tired, because they were depleted, because they were getting into that super crazy rip to fuck condition that top professional bodybuilders and those did. And because they were so tired, they found it a real struggle to do the stuff in the gym. It was only when people like Dorian Yates came along and said, why are you using less weights? When those same weights is what maintain the muscle tissue on you. And that keeps that size, that raw muscle, that lean muscle, keeps that on the frame, and you bring that into the competition. A few freaks were able to grow in the competition, but that's because they eased off the gas in the off season and they kind of put back down on the gas as they approach competition. And I can think of, for example, Kevin Levrone would be that kind of bodybuilder, but most people did not. So a product like Anavar, GP Anavar 50 from Geneza is keeping that muscle tissue on you. Right, guys, keep your eye on the game. The psychological aspects when you're training super heavy and trying to bulk up, and especially the psychological effects on your body when you're coming down and getting into shape. And you need to have that. What is the end game? What do I want to look like? It isn't easy, guys. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But it's only going to be listeners to these kind of podcasts and using products from Geneza that's going to make that happen. You need to have that in mind and always have your eye on the end game. Come on the forums. Let us know you're getting on. We can help you. Do a consult with Steve. Have me coach you, whatever it takes. But especially make sure you're using a great source like Geneza Pharma to help you with your journey. Please know, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.